Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today, Dave X, the Chief Technologist for Red Hat North America Public Sector. Now, Dave, before a break, we were talking a lot about DevOps, DevSecOps, and why it's gaining so much popularity. Give us an example of maybe where this is actually happening, because I think a lot of people hear this and go, yeah, DevOps, it's a hot new thing. Yeah. Might as well be zero trust or cloud. But this is real for you guys.
Yeah, no, it's you're exactly right. You think, oh, this is some hip Silicon Valley thing, and I have to have skinny jeans to be able to do this. But it's not actually the case. Where we were very lucky this year at the Red Hat Summit to have Lockheed Martin be on the main stage, and what was interesting is that they said that the government brought them in, and it's like you will either change or you will be changed, and it was a very chilling thing for them in terms of like changing their processes, being able to react a lot more quickly. And so what they did is that they worked with Red Hat, our open innovation labs, and ordinarily it used to take them 5 to 7 years to go from code to have it running in the F-22 cockpit. By working with Red Hat and Open Innovation Labs for the first year, we're already shaved 2 years off of that timeline, and we're looking to shrink that even more.
And they're doing that because of these concepts we're talking about.
Yeah, it's moving faster. It's not waiting 6 weeks, 6 months to get a VM created.
Right.
Yeah.
And then also the idea of that as soon as you wrent the piece of code, it goes to this automation, orchestration piece
You're
to
checking
go, yes,
every single time.
it meets these sets of requirements, and then it goes on.
Nothing has drifted from my baseline.
Yeah. And is this something that other agencies are starting, and other even vendors are starting to take notice? Because obviously Lockheed, the F-22 program's a big program, big dollars, a lot of attention gets paid.
Yep. Yeah, we also had at the Red Hat Summit the CIO and CTO of U.S. Customs and Immigration Services talking about the same sort of thing of, automate as much as you can.
Yeah, USCIS has one of those, probably the standard for a lot of the government. They're out in front and they really have it going.
Yeah.
One of the other pieces to this discussion we have to bring up is Red Hat, and you guys got bought by IBM. A lot of people seem to be wondering what's that mean for you guys at Red Hat, but also what's it mean for a transition, because anytime one company buys another, there's potentially a downward impact on customers. So talk a little bit about that transition.
Yeah, and it seems like the big trend these days when it comes to corporate acquisitions is to leave the acquired company intact in many cases. So if you look at, say, like LinkedIn or GitHub, a lot of people don't know it's owned by Microsoft, or like VMware and their relationship with Dell. And it's their independence is what really is a big differentiator for them. And this the IBM acquisition of Red Hat is no different in terms of we are independent, and that was one of the big values that they saw, where historically Red Hat created an open substrate that was the thing that stayed the same, so everything below it could be different. And we proved that out during the Unix wars of having people move from proprietary Unix systems to x86 with their choice of hardware using Linux, to today using OpenShift and Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and extending that exact same motion to the cloud. So it's all 4 footprints, whether it's physical, virtual, private cloud, or public cloud.
When you sit down with your federal customers, is that the first question you get? Where's your blue shirt? I mean, you are wearing one today, but
I thought I have a red.
You have a red one too.
Red one too, but no, I wore the blue shirt today. But and it is a question that they have, but they are But once we have that conversation, they are relieved, because they a lot of times they see us as that arbiter of being that open substrate, and allows them to have that choice and avoid vendor lock-in, and they don't want to lose that. And that's one of the things that IBM is so focused on, making sure that we're independent.
Nice. One of the reasons why is I think IBM decided to purchase Red Hat for multiple reasons, but agencies are living in an environment that's not going to change anytime soon, commonly known as hybrid IT. Some in the cloud, some on premises, some in private clouds. Talk about that trend that you're seeing as well. What are agencies doing around kind of their this ever-changing IT environment?
Yeah, and that's one of the other big reasons why IBM bought Red Hat is for the hybrid cloud. And so there's a stat that I believe AWS put out a little while ago saying that about 20% of the enterprise IT workloads are in a public cloud today. So that leaves 80% is are already still running in physical data centers or on private clouds. And so there's a lot of opportunities there for people to move to the cloud, but the reality is that as you do your application modernization, there may be some workloads that, again, cloud smart wouldn't be a good candidate to move to the cloud, or you may want to retire it in a couple of years, so the net new work to do a migration isn't really worth it. So the whole thought of having that open substrate that allows you to standardize on something and be successful in the public or in your private data center and extend that to the public cloud allows you to train people on one set of technologies and move to the cloud at the pace that they feel comfortable. But by having that be the same, they can accelerate their movement to the cloud because it's something that they already know and they're familiar with.
We want to get to the workforce piece in a second before we get there. The hybrid, when you talk to clients and they're like, okay, but we have this here and that there, how do they connect, how do they talk together? That's when you talk about the open substrate, which is, I think, a very technical term for people like me. You're just talking about the fact is it's proprietary, open source, open standards.
Yes, yeah, and that's the big difference where, it's like I said, back in the Unix wars, you could, everybody had their different Unix system, right? And you could only buy that Unix operating system from the Unix hardware vendor. And to move to a different Unix vendor, it was a porting cost. And it was prohibitively expensive for most people. And then all of a sudden, Linux comes along, and it runs everywhere, right? It runs, today it runs on your mobile phone, it runs in your car, it runs in the cloud, it runs on your laptop, right? And so what that does is by having Linux be open, that allows the hardware choice to be wide open, and also the footprint of where you want to deploy it to be wide open too. So it gives a lot of that power away, it takes the power away from the proprietary vendor and puts it back in the hands of the customer, giving them the power to move to whatever cloud they want at the rate that they want because of what they standardized on.
And that's why you can put some things in-house, some things on the cloud, and as, again, going back to the workforce piece now, the employees, the IT employees will get used to, okay, I see how it works here and I see how it works there because they're connected or they're talking. I mean, that's really the key here is that the employees will get that training that eventually when you do move to the cloud, they'll be ready for it.
Yeah, exactly. And even going back to what we were talking about earlier, the DevOps Sec approaches as well, the same tests that you're doing for security in your, of your Linux operating system for a private cloud workload can be very, very similar to what you deploy in the public cloud.
What's the biggest change the workforce has to kind of get ready for as they kind of move into this hybrid world, but also the cloud environment and the DevSecOps environment?
Yeah, well, I think one of the big things that I think is of the CIO conversations I've been having is concern about workforce and automation creating a lot of fear with government employees, where it's like, oh, am I going to be automated out of a job? And but the reality, though, is that when I talk to a lot of the government employees, there's no shortage of work for them to do, right? And if you could automate a lot of the drudgery away from of what they're doing, they're actually relieved by that. And again, it's like, why focus on the drudgery when you could do a lot more meaningful things for the mission? And also when you talk to a lot of the young millennials, it's all about it's more than just a paycheck; it's purpose.
Right.
And if they're doing a job that is just tedious and boring, and there's no real tie back to what the mission is, that's not going to attract and retain talent. So by automating that as much as possible, it allows people to focus on that meaningful work.
It's interesting you talk about the fact that people are worried about their jobs.
Yeah.
And I think the Trump administration, generally speaking, has done a pretty good job of communicating that, listen, reskilling, upskilling, it's not about getting rid of people.
Right.
It's getting you to do better, what they call high-value work.
Right.
And I think that with the robotics process automation, some of the pilots we're seeing, whether at GSA or National Science Foundation or Bureau of Fiscal Service, they're starting to see like, okay, I don't have to do this drudgery anymore. What does that mean for the CIOs, though? They have to train people to do things differently, and part of that training may be to work, again, in an open environment or a cloud environment.
Yep. Yeah, and it's a matter of changing, a lot of times it is changing those processes of going from waterfall to agile, but it's also reskilling on the technologies themselves. So, learning about automation, learning about RPA, The other part too is that I saw a lot some of the pilots that are going on for cyber skills. Being able to have, whether it's federal government employees and I've seen it in the state of Virginia as well, where people can be reskilled and be nominated to work in the cybersecurity world, and the government will fund their reskilling effort. And so the benefit there is that as you automate some tasks away, creating a lot of surplus people, you could repurpose those people and those skills to fulfill the cyber gap, which has a negative unemployment rate right now.
Absolutely. I think the last thing I saw was something to the effect of like 350,000 openings in the cyber world. So the more people you can get, and they don't have to be cyber experts, right? They can just know enough to be like, okay, I can look at that code and go, okay, that needs to be looked at again, or it can go forward. You don't need to know all the intricacies of the cyber code.
And that again goes back to the compliance as code, where if you can automate as much as you can possibly and share that automation code, you can have a small number of like high-end security experts figure out the right way to lock down a web server running on top of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and then share that with everybody else. So they don't need to be the security guru. And so again, you're resharing, and that makes everybody a lot stronger from a security standpoint.
Dave, we're almost out of time. It's been a fascinating conversation. I want to ask you about some of the common potholes or some advice you have for agencies as they're moving in this direction of DevSecOps, of containerization, of Kubernetes.
Yep.
What are some of the things that advice or potholes to avoid?
Yeah, I would say doing business as usual isn't going to work, right? So it's like, a lot of times you'll have a vendor come to the government and say, oh, if you only buy my widget, all your problems are going to go away. But the reality is, though, is that if you don't change your processes and you don't train your people and take care of your people, that there's no product in the world that's going to be able to help you. Yeah. And so,
go ahead. I was going to say, though, don't do business as usual, though, means what? Means you have to look at the development, you have to look at your approach, your processes. I had a great conversation with a chief human capital officer, and they said they looked at something to the effect of like 1,500, 1,400 processes, and they took it down to 600. Yeah. So I think that's part of what the change that has to happen that fits into this DevSecOps world, too.
Yeah, and also it's more than just the processes of doing the workload, but it's also from a leadership top-down perspective too. So, how you lead your people is very, very important. And there's so many HBR articles that I see coming out that talk about the open organization. Stanley McChrystal's book Team of Teams is one of my favorites in terms of empowerment and pushing the decision making as far down in the org chart as possible, so that it's a good day when the leaders at the top make as few decisions as possible, because you've empowered the staff to be able to make those decisions directly.
Very good. Dave, this has been, again, a fascinating conversation, but unfortunately we are out of time. So let me thank my guest, Dave X, the Chief Technologist for Red Hat North America Public Sector. Dave, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you, Jason.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search innovation.